The U.S. Navy is about to become the U.S. Air Force. Aircraft carriers are about to become aircraft. Like the aircraft that take off from them, these aircraft carriers would take off to the skies as opposed to the seas. But for the same reason, to project the might of the U.S. Navy in the brightest colors. Uncommon as the concept of a flying aircraft carrier is, it isn't a new project and has actually been around since the time of the World Wars. And now, thanks to the advent of technology, they have received renewed attention, and the U.S. is once again aiming for revolutionary flying carriers. Flying carriers gaining attention at this time could be owed in large part to the complete dominance of American sea-based aircraft carriers today. In fact, 25% of the world's aircraft carriers belong to the U.S., and their total deck space is more than double that of all other nations combined. In addition, the members of the lead USS Ford class of these aircraft carriers are far more lethal than every other aircraft carrier in history, and the following features prove that. Number 3. Nuclear power. 2 Bechtel A-1B nuclear reactors, the most cutting-edge engines created for use on water, power the USS Gerald Ford. As a result, the carrier would only need to be refueled once over its entire 50-year operational life, as these engines make use of the everlasting nature of nuclear energy. This means USS Ford can run for 25 years at a time without refueling. And with a peak speed of around 30 knots, the supercarrier can access every country on the planet, just in time to pay friendly visits to allies and wreak havoc on enemies. Number 2. New sensors and processing systems. USS Ford features the latest sensors, processors, and weapons needed on an aircraft carrier to maintain that balance of intelligence and lethality. Unlike virtually every other aircraft carrier in the world, the USS Ford features a single system for both horizon and volume search in the form of the AN/SPY-3 multifunction radar for X and S-band active electronically scanned array. It remains the most advanced radar system from the U.S., with enough versatility to handle surveillance, air traffic control, missile communications, and spot targets from miles away. Number 1. American fighter jets and UAVs. Up to 75 fighter jets and unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, can call the USS Ford home at a time, including the Navy's favorite child, the 5th-generation F-35C Lightning II Joint Strike Fighter, whose development program remains the most expensive weapons development program of the Pentagon to date, with a reported cost of $400 billion. The result of such an expensive program is a fighter that really can do it all: close air support, vertical takeoff and landing, and everything in between, cementing it as the modern go-to fighter for the Navy and every other department of the military. That is, until the 6th-generation F/A-XX fighter takes center stage, of course. And for when that happens, the USS Ford is already equipped with the technologies required to host, launch, and recover it. All of these and many more combine to make the U.S. undefeatable on the seas. And so an airborne version of them could make the U.S. undefeatable in the skies, which remains an ultimate goal. And many programs have been created to achieve this goal. Although real flying carrier concepts may not be as dramatic as the fictional helicarrier of Marvel's S.H.I.E.L.D., they're as close as any's gotten in the last 100 years. And going that far back in time means we say hi to the airships. As far back as 1917, experiments were made with aircraft slung under airships, which we'll call microfighters. These hanging aircraft were there primarily to defend the airships. But as those airships went out of style, different flying carrier programs came to be, each unique in its own right. Boeing 747 Airborne Aircraft Carrier. The 1970s came with the U.S. Air Force experimenting with the idea of converting one of its large aircraft into a flying aircraft carrier full of parasite fighters that could be deployed and even recovered in midair. Among the contenders for this role were the Lockheed C-5 Galaxy and the Boeing 747. Boeing would take the lead when they correctly pointed out in their proposal that the 747 offered superior range and endurance when flying with a full payload of an impressive 883,000 pounds. The 747 would therefore be able to carry up to 10 microfighters at a time. Boeing would specially design and build the microfighters to be small enough to be housed within the 747, along with an apparatus that would allow the large plane to carry the fighters a long distance, drop them where they were needed to fight, recover them once again, and refuel them if need be. But some uncertainties would surface, from the fuel range to how well the Boeing microfighters would fare against the advanced threats they were supposed to square off with. Ultimately, the proposal never made it off the page of Boeing's report, but the report did establish that despite the challenges, the concept, although likely costly, was actually technically feasible. Nuclear-powered Lockheed CL-1201. Lockheed, in staying true to their nature of pushing the limits, decided to go at a flying aircraft carrier the size of a traditional aircraft carrier. This aircraft or aircraft carrier would weigh a literal groundbreaking 5,265 tons and stand as tall as a 14-story building. To get such a massive structure to fly, the design included a 1,120-foot wingspan with a 560-foot-long fuselage. That's the length of 2.5 Boeing 747s end to end. The Lockheed CL-1201 could, however, surprisingly be powered by only 4 huge turbofan engines, powered by regular jet fuel to an altitude under 16,000 feet. At this point, the nuclear energy from an onboard reactor takes over and powers the jet for 41 days straight without refueling or having to land for a second. In fact, the aircraft could maintain a Mach 0.8 cruising speed for this period and fly at around 30,000 feet up. This massive aircraft would have a crew of 845, be able to deploy 22 multi-role fighters, maintain a hangar bay for repairs, but would also likely cost billions of dollars and far too many labor hours to produce and maintain, which must have contributed to why the aircraft never made it past the proposal stage. But its concept to this day stands as a historical anomaly that continues to inspire renewed attention from the world. The B-36 Peacemaker. The B-36 Peacemaker strategic bomber was another aircraft intended to be upgraded to carry microfighters to launch. Its microfighters would be the McDonnell F-85 Goblin, and it would house up to 4 of them. The B-36 was the ideal pick this time in the 1950s, thanks to its massive size and weight. Its 230-foot wings would dwarf even those of the B-52 Stratofortress and cement the B-36 as one of the largest aircraft to ever take to the skies. Its weight comes in at an astonishing 410,000 pounds when fully loaded with fuel and up to 86,000 pounds of weapons. Despite all of these bragging rights, the B-36 would never fly an operational mission, as although it was desired to give the US the capability of bombing Berlin efficiently, World War II would since have ended by the time it was ready. However, its massive size and range prompted the Air Force to consider its use as a flying aircraft carrier, but that too would not come into fruition as the advent of mid-air refueling dramatically increased the operational range of all varieties of aircraft and ultimately undermined the importance of the range of the B-36 Peacemaker. Lockheed C-130 Hercules. Away from the attempts of the 1900s, the US has relatively recently been looking into a new flying carrier program. Since 2015, the United States Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, has been investigating the prospect of using a modified Lockheed C-130 Hercules cargo aircraft to deploy and support Dynetics X-61 Gremlins unmanned aerial vehicles as microfighters. And on completing their missions, these microfighters are recovered using a proprietary air recovery method involving a drogue-like receptacle and docking technique. Testing is currently being conducted at Dugway Proving Grounds with International Air Response providing the contracted C-130A. In January of 2022, one of these tests saw DARPA successfully launch an X-61 Gremlin UAV from the bay of the C-130. Should the test get the checkmark and see the aircraft carrier officially launched, it would enable the US to deploy drones from motherships while still outside of enemy air defenses, allowing the drones to go on and engage targets before returning to the airspace around the mothership to be recaptured and carried home for service or repairs. However, the tests aren't all rosy, as despite a test showing that the drone could in fact be deployed by the C-130, the drone itself would be ultimately destroyed after an hour and a half of flight that ended in a parachute failure. but that's likely an easy fix that would be prevented in subsequent tests. With that setback out of the way, the program would continue as planned, facilitate the rise of other similar programs, and ultimately gift the U.S. the power of a supercarrier in the sky to complement an already powerful fleet of aircraft carriers. And according to experts, this fleet of aircraft carriers and flying carriers would get even more powerful if you subscribe to this channel and give this video a like. Remember, this is according to experts, so kindly do so now. That would be all for this video. Thanks for watching.